Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the GioMoShow interviews. This time, an episode of football therapy for you guys on the GioMoShow. I'm Giovanni Mosher, your host and sports media director here at WXOU. And by my side here is Angelo Grupido, one of the only and most passionate Chicago Bears fans that I know, and one of the most brilliant football minds that I could get here in the studio. So, Angelo, thank you very much for coming into the GioMoShow.
You are gassing me up to a level that I cannot meet, Gio. These people are going to be disappointed. It's great to be here, Giovanni. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. And just for some background, this is I would say the second time you'd be on the GioMoShow. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was there once
like
last
fall?
year, sometime about that. Yeah.
Last fall, and I remember you were way far and beyond the contract knowledge that I had, so I just knew I had to get you back here. And we're going to be talking about the NFC North and how the Bears fare in what I would consider is the Lions division now, but we'll be talking about that for this episode for you guys. It's been so long since I've talked about football.
I will say, one thing I want to say, and granted, I'm coming here on a Bears fan, so maybe it's bad to say this. I do think that, in general, people count out the Vikings a little bit. I know they're not. Their record last year, they're probably not as good as their record was. But still, they went, what was it, 13-4?
13-4, yeah.
With a rookie head coach. They've lost some players. I don't think they're going to go 13 wins again.
Yeah.
But I do think people count them out a little bit early.
You've been watching watching a lot of quarterback, haven't you?
But I'm just saying, they got some players. I don't think people should forget about them. But that being said, go Bears. I'm not. You can forget about the purple people eaters. Those guys are no good.
So before we get too deep into this, I gotta kind of establish the landscape here. So for you as a Chicago Bears fan, obviously in Michigan, not a common sight. So for you, I'm curious what path led you to be a Bears fan.
Well, they were on TV a lot.
Oh yeah,
because they were within division. I loved and granted, this is me being kind of a stupid kid about it. I love the I love the colors. I love the Super Bowl shuffle. The
valid.
super fans. We're coming to you now from a certain city in a certain place, the city of big shoulders, home to the one and the only the Bears.
That's all valid. I've got to tell you.
You know what? It was a fun fandom to get into, and at the time when I really started getting into it, it was a bad time to be a Lions fan. I did not want to be a Lions fan. And they had the whole thing with scaring away Megatron, and it was just like, I don't want to support a franchise that's not going to treat its best players well.
Right.
And I didn't have any attachment to the team. I didn't grow up watching the Lions. They're not a team that I had attachment to. So I'm like, well, I'm going to go and pick my own team. Mm-hmm. So I looked at what teams were on a lot, and I'm like, well, the Packers are evil, so I can't choose them.
Okay,
they're terrible.
So we got that common ground
evil.
At least.
The Vikings look. I don't care for purple as a primary color. That being said, I'll give them. They did the throwback jerseys. They announced the throwback. The throwbacks are actually all right.
Yeah, not bad.
But the purple, it doesn't do it for me. So I went with the Bears.
Yeah,
they're a good team. Well, they're not a good team, but they're a fun team.
At the time, they were a little bit better than they are now. I would say, right?
No, it was the first year. It would have been 2017. They were bad in 2017. That was they were pretty bad.
Was that Trubisky's rookie year, or was that the year after?
That was the last John Fox year.
Ah, okay. So
that was still not really a good time to be a Bears fan.
So neither of us have yet to see prosperous years, I guess we could say. Would you say?
18 was good. 18 was good. They went 12-4, won the division. Now the double doink was not a good moment.
Right.
That was a rough moment.
And you know what? Talk to me about the double doink. Just kind of giving the perspective of a Bears fan. You guys were, I believe it was the wild card round against the Eagles.
Yeah, it was wild card against the Eagles. Trubisky and the team marched down, get it within. I want to say it was a 40-yard field goal, and then Parkey double doinks it. I want to say it was like his 5th kick that year that he had missed by doinking it off the uprights. I think he hit them twice in a game against the Lions actually that year, if I remember right.
My memory ain't helping me there, but I'll take your word for it.
that was a rough moment. I have a friend who's an Eagles fan. So
oh no, he probably took advantage of that. Let's say that.
Although I will say it was really fun when they lost the Super Bowl and I turned around after the Chiefs made that kick, and I asked him, I'm like,
just this past Super Bowl.
This past Super Bowl, I turn around, I look at him, I'm like, how are we feeling? How are we feeling? I've been asking that the whole game. He's like, oh, we feeling good? We're feeling good. I turn around, I'm like, how are we feeling? And am I allowed to swear here?
We'll keep it to we'll keep it to
He told me to shut the up for saying that one. We'll see. I'll beat
got under his skin
so
a little
bit.
bit.
Do it in post.
Don't worry, I'll take care of everything here. So we got double doink, and too young to remember the 2006 Super Bowl. Devin Hester's touchdown kick return. Both of us were like 5-6 years old at the time. Not much of a core memory.
There's not much I can remember when I'm 5.
Yeah. So now to kind of wrap up, let's say, the intro of Mr. Angelo Grupido, who is your favorite Bear? Going back in history or current, who's your favorite
all-time favorite Bear?
All time.
I'm going to go with William the Refrigerator Perry.
I love that answer because I feel like everybody would say either like Walter Payton or, the famous 85 linebacking core, or like Urlacher. The Refrigerator Perry is my answer as well.
It's just there's something awesome about just, okay, we get the biggest man we can, and we send him straight into the other team, and we pound the defensive line,
and we dare you to try and tackle him.
That's football right there. That is the quintessential football. We're going to put our biggest and our strongest against your biggest and your strongest, and we're going to see who can win.
And it's just all of the, even like it was the 80s, so they did a little like refrigerator theme song, cool rap thing. It was awesome.
They call him the Refrigerator because one man cannot move him. It was just, I love that, just the hard, gritty style of football.
Yeah. Yeah, and that 85 team in that kind of era, no better example than that team. So
exactly.
I'm with you on the Refrigerator there. So now let's fast forward a little bit more to, let's say, the current century. Mm-hmm. So for me, like, I don't keep track of the Bears very much, repping Barry Sanders, but for you guys, when you fired Matt Nagy, who ended up going back to the Chiefs, and for your coaching hire, you had Justin Fields, needed a little bit of let's say some work and some development, but then you guys go and hire Matt Eberflus as more of a defensive coach. So what was your look on that? What was your perspective on that hire? Is it going well so far, or did they make the right choice? What do you think?
It's difficult to rate the hire currently, given the situation for the first year.
Okay.
You're going into this year knowing that this is going to be a rebuild year, knowing that the team is probably not expecting to win very many games. Mm-hmm. You're tearing everything down. They trading Khalil Mack before the season.
That's right.
Trading Robert Quinn during the season. They let James Daniels walk in free agency. And then during this, of course, it also did not help during the season. All the injuries they had, they lost Jalen Johnson, they lost Eddie Jackson, and just generally, losing Allen Robinson to free agency. That being said, it's not like Allen Robinson was that good his last year on the Bears, but still, and then losing Darnell Mooney to injury. Mm-hmm. You go into the season where it's very difficult circumstances for the Bears to win.
Yeah,
and you're expecting them to do bad, and they did poorly, but there were still some good moments. Early half of the season before trading away Quinn, before the loss of Eddie Jackson, and some more before loss of Mooney, before just the injuries started to hit.
Roquan Smith too.
Yeah, before trading away Roquan Smith, mm-hmm. They were playing decently, not well, but they were playing respectable football.
Respectable, okay.
And then they traded away Roquan Smith. They had some more injuries, and that's when it really started to go downhill record-wise. So there's enough in that beginning half of the season, and with the team generally staying together, that it's difficult to be unhappy with where the team is right now. I mean, it's hard to sit here and say, like, okay, we're completely ecstatic, there's no worry whatsoever.
Right.
Whenever you have a team that's picking number one overall, there's some, okay, how much is that intended, and how much of that is we got something to worry about. But at the end of the day, this is they coming out of a season where the Bears knew that they were rebuilding. The mm-hmm. plan was to rebuild. They needed to tear it down to the studs. They needed to get rid of the bloated contracts from the Pace administration. Mm-hmm. They needed to reset the team, get some youth in, get some more draft capital. It was something that, you knew it was going to be a down season for the Bears. So the outcome is not particularly unexpected. So I'd say right now it's cautiously optimistic on
Cautiously,
Eberflus.
okay.
It's at the time I was cautiously optimistic about the hire.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say things have gone probably a little bit worse than I expected record wise. But then again, you look at the season and you don't expect Roquan Smith to be traded
Oh,
midseason.
yeah.
You don't expect to be losing almost all of your defensive backs.
Yeah.
You don't expect to be losing your only your only good wide receiver. So it's given the way that everything goes, I can't particularly complain about the outcomes. So all in all, reasonably happy with the way that Flus has performed. Cautiously optimistic. I think that the offense showed promise, which is good. They were a great rushing offense. They've got some work to do in the passing department, but with improvements to the offensive line and big improvements in the wide receiver core.
Yeah.
I think that there is definitely room for optimism that the passing game will increase, and they already had a very effective rushing offense. Granted, they've lost Darnell Mooney, but bringing in Roshan Johnson in the draft, bringing in Deontay Foreman in free agency, and then keeping Khalil Herbert, who was very efficient runner last year.
He had some bright flashes, and I only paid attention for fantasy reasons, but there were a few games where he and David Montgomery were splitting like just about half and half.
He's a good runner. If I remember correct, not the greatest pass protector, but as an early down back, a good early down back. And in these days of everyone doing running back by committee, it's a rough situation if you're a fantasy football guy. But as far as a team perspective, they've got a pretty good stable of running backs. They should be able to continue to get good production out of that. And then obviously when you have a rusher who's as dynamic as Fields at the quarterback position, that opens up a lot of running lanes for your running backs.
Yeah, and I want to ask you specifically about Justin Fields, because from my perspective, I hear, obviously from Detroit media, it's going to be a little bit biased, but just all around, it seems like I can't get a consensus on what the level of Justin Fields, because I've heard some people, they have MVP votes going towards him this year. They got... Or they have him repicking number one, and so I have all these different sides of it, and I can't make a consensus. What says you about Justin Fields?
I think it kind of comes down to whether or not you believe that Fields is going to be able to take that next step.
And what would that next step be? Would you be referring to passing or overall?
It would be an improvement generally in passing. I mean, he's already in a fantastic running quarterback.
Oh yeah.
There are very few quarterbacks that are better runners in the National Football League than Justin Fields. I mean, Lamar Jackson's probably got him beat, and that's, as far as just pure rushing ability, that's probably about it.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts might be able to give him some competition.
How could I forget Jalen Hurts?
Yeah, but I mean, for me, honestly, like Hurts is kind of is more of a power styled runner as opposed to Lamar and Justin Fields, or Lamar's quick.
Yeah.
But definitely, I mean, there's
Fields is definitely
top three. Yeah,
he's fantastically fast.
Yeah.
So it comes down to an improvement in the passing game, especially in that short and that intermediate game. He's got a pretty good deep ball.
Okay,
that's been one of his strengths, but improving consistency in that short and that intermediate passing game, and bringing up that passing game, and I think that there are reasons to be optimistic about that. We've got the addition of DJ Moore is huge.
I was just about to ask about that, because that's something that's scaring me. I'm not gonna lie.
Because DJ Moore is a fantastic wide receiver. So bringing him in, we've now got DJ Moore at the one spot. Then you've got Darnell Mooney at two. Darnell Mooney's a good wide receiver in his own right. Probably not good enough to be a wide receiver one, but to have him as your number two guy, he's perfectly good for that. And then, as much as Chase Claypool has been a horrendous disappointment,
that was my next question. Where does he fit?
You could do a lot worse at wide receiver 3 than Chase Claypool.
It's a big body.
Chase Claypool is not worth the draft capital they gave up for him. He just isn't. I'm going to leave it at that.
It's a bad buy.
But now that he's on the team, he's a guy that you're happy with as your wide receiver 3. He's a good wide receiver 3.
As a 3, yeah.
Yeah. And then the depth behind them isn't fantastic, but they've got a good top 3. They took Tyler Scott, I think, 3rd round in the drafts. They've got some potential youth there. It's a revamped wide receiver room, which helps a lot. I mean, we've seen over the years plenty of examples of quarterbacks getting good wide receivers and it helping significantly to take that next step.
It's like-
you see it in
it's-
Buffalo with the addition of Diggs.
Mhm.
You saw it last year with AJB and the Eagles. You can get a lot out of your quarterback by giving them weapons. So
giving him someone to throw to. Who would have
giving-
thought, right?
giving Justin Fields a very good wide receiver, and then hopefully a good wide receiver supporting cast around that. And then Komet is a solid tight end. I'm not going to go out here and tell you that he's an elite tight end or anything, but he's a perfectly capable tight end in this league. He's a good tight end in this league.
Alongside Robert Tonyan that you guys got from the Packers as well.
And then hopefully as well being able to get some pass catching out of the backfield as well from the running backs. They've got a good situation there for pass catchers. Beefing up the offensive line a little bit in the draft.
Yep.
It's with the offensive line improvements and with the wide receiver improvements, there should definitely be the opportunity to take that next step for Justin Fields. Now it comes down to, can he actually make those improvements?
Right.
And
It's more on him to take advantage of all these improving surroundings.
And I certainly think that I wouldn't bet against him.
Okay.
Because Justin Fields, if you follow Bears camp and you follow Bears news, one of the things that you will see is pretty much everything about Justin Fields is how much time he spends in the facility. That he is the guy who is the first guy in, he's the last guy out. He's constantly working on improving his game, constantly trying to study film to become better. That's something that you see out of the guys that were able to take those big leaps, out of guys like Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen who were able to work and improve their flaws and become consistently elite quarterbacks. Is that that willingness to spend tons of time in the film room, to spend tons of time working out and improving their craft. And that's something that we've seen out of Justin Fields. So if he doesn't take that next step, it certainly won't be for lack of trying.
And I'm sure there's a little, if that were to be the case, I'm sure there's a little bit of consolation to that where that it's not for, because he doesn't care about the game or it's not because he's given up on the city. I'm sure regardless of what happens, knowing that he's putting that much effort and care into it makes you feel a little bit better, I would imagine, right?
It's certainly a lot better than hearing something like with Jamarcus Russell where he's watching that blank CD of film tape.
I can't believe that was a real story.
Or what was the other one? I forget what QB. It might have been Ryan Leaf, where the guy put $100 bill in the playbook and he gave it to him to see if he would actually read the playbook and notice that there was $100 bill in there. And he gave it back to him. The bill's still in the same place.
Oh I can't believe those things are real. Those are some of the funniest NFL stories to me.
Yeah, that's when you see that, oh my God, we drafted a bust.
Or you have to put in the contract that you have to watch 4 hours of film a week, and ouch. So moving on to, we've taken a big tour around the Bears roster and all the improvements that they've made. But one thing that I wanted to specifically ask is trading away David Montgomery.
We didn't trade him; we let him walk.
Forgive me, letting him go and having him end up signing with the Lions. So for you guys, what's gonna be missing from David Montgomery? I guess another way to phrase it is, what am I in for?
I think the biggest thing that's going to be unfortunate with the loss of David Montgomery is that he's a 3-down back, which is something that we don't really have on the Bears at this time. He's good on the early downs. He's reasonable in pass protection. He's a good pass catcher out of the backfield. We don't necessarily have a back that is all 3 of those right now, at least that we know can do all three of those things consistently. We have Herbert and Foreman are great runners, and then Johnson should be a decent pass catcher, but there's not any that is as necessarily a complete a back as David Montgomery. Yeah, now, on the flip side, in today's days of running back by committee, you don't necessarily need that. You can get away with having 3 really cheap running backs, and that's a nice thing to have. Theoretically, we'll see if it becomes actually the case.
Yeah.
But theoretically, the Bears should be able to replace most of Montgomery's production with our 3 running backs, and it will cost a lot less because they're all on rookie deals.
Right, and that's been the big conversation around the NFL.
I should correct myself. Foreman's not on a rookie deal. He was signed in free agency, but he's on a cheap deal. I want to say it's something like $2 million a year.
Yeah, still a cheap deal. And that's the big conversation around the NFL right now. Just on my way here, I heard some guys on the radio screaming and hollering about it, about how, the devaluation of the running back position and how it's becoming more, like you were saying, a cheap running back by committee as opposed to paying a big star like Saquon Barkley, name on Scott
if there was ever an off season to look at it, I mean, you can look at all the guys that are still in free agency right now, with Dalvin Cook being in free agency.
Yeah, he's still out
Ezekiel
there.
Elliott's in free agency. Leonard Fournette's in free agency. Kareem Hunt's in free agency. And then you've got the big name guys that are on franchise tags and not re-signed. You have Josh Jacobs, whose reports are that he's not going to attend training camp, and then he might hold out the regular season. You have Saquon saying the same thing.
Yep.
Then you have Pollard, who was supposedly not holding out of training camp, but did not sign a long-term deal.
Yeah, he was tagged
off the tag. He's only playing on the tag. Now more than you had Austin Eckler asking for a trade because the Chargers weren't willing to give him a contract increase, and then you had the rest of the NFL saying, we're not really interested, despite Eckler being probably one of the best, if not the best, pass-catching running backs in the league.
He's nuts.
It's crazy to see the devaluation of the running back position in the NFL these days, where it is skewed so heavily towards running backs don't matter.
Right. And just for reference to everybody watching, that is all of those kind of current free agencies are as of July 18th of 2023, just for history's
historical
sake.
purposes, yeah.
For historical purposes.
In case they sign Leonard Fournette while we're waiting, or the Dolphins go and sign Dalvin Cook.
Yeah,
you never know.
Yeah, and it's fast. The whole concept is fascinating to me because, two camps want opposite things for the same reason. The teams don't want to pay the running backs because of potential for injury. The running backs want to get paid and get guaranteed money because they might be injured. So it's a complete deadlock, but ultimately it's the teams and the owners that have the final decision in such a matter. Now, I mean, if Saquon can kind of pull off a successful holdout, it didn't, hasn't really worked so much recently. Le'Veon Bell being the biggest example of that.
And then you also have Melvin Gordon as well as another example of it not really working out that well.
Exactly. So it's going to have to take, let's say, a historical change in the NFL for, that devaluation to start becoming revaluation.
Yeah, I don't really see an obvious way for running backs to revalue themselves. The problem is it's just too easy for teams to replace an elite running back with somebody cheaper. You can get, 80% of the production of a top end guy with somebody that you drafted in the third round, and you're not going to be paying him anything for 4 years. So,
or if you're super lucky like the Chiefs, because of course they are, 7th round with Isaiah Pacheco. That could happen.
Yeah, you get that. You have the Jags a couple years back taking James Robinson undrafted and getting a couple 1,000-yard seasons out of him. You have, we talked about David Montgomery a little bit. He was, I want to say, either a 3rd or a 4th. I think he was a 4th round pick by the Bears. And then you had Khalil Herbert was, I believe, a 6th round pick. And both are solid running backs that put up good production. It's difficult to justify. It's difficult to justify paying running backs. It's difficult to justify taking running backs high in the draft just because it's so easy to replace them. Where even if you have an elite guy, even if you have the best running back in the league, how much of an edge does that really give you over a team like the Chiefs that's running a running back by committee and getting great running production and having one of the best offenses in the league, and they're not paying their running backs anything.
Yeah, they get everything they need out of it with Pacheco and McKinnon and just kind of whoever else. And what's also funny, another point I've been hearing is the one way that running backs can kind of, I guess one path for running backs to reestablish their value is to basically become receivers. Jahmyr Gibbs being picked by the Lions very high up because of his pass catching ability and ability to be in the slot and run routes, all that stuff, to basically be a receiver as well. And kind of same deal with Austin Eckler, his pass catching ability, and Tony Pollard being valued that way. So the running backs kind of have to become receivers.
It helps. I don't know that it's necessarily going to increase their value because you're already seeing it more and more with, it definitely devalues the guys that can't be receivers. Because right now, as far as the only really, how many running backs out there that are star running backs are not great receivers? The only ones that aren't really great receivers that are top running backs would be Nick Chubb, who's really a decent receiver, but he just doesn't catch a lot of passes. And then Derrick Henry, who again, he's not like awful or anything, but he's
Right.
not a receiving back. And pretty much every other great running back can catch.
Yeah.
It's become a thing, I think, these days in the NFL where if you want to be a running back, you have to be able to catch at least a little bit, just
Exactly.
to get that Swiss Army knife out of the backfield. And I see people saying, well, the path to relevance for running backs is to become an offensive weapon. You
Like
see
the
that
Swiss
thrown
Army
around,
knife. Yeah.
and I don't see it building the value back that way. I mean, it's possible that maybe if they become specialized enough, maybe then you can start to blend running back with slot receiver and
Right.
maybe, but even then, I don't see it happening enough to boost the value because even the pass catching running backs are, there's still a lot of good pass catching running backs out
Yeah.
there, and the pass catching running backs that we have, we talked about Austin Eckler
Yeah.
briefly, they're still not really getting paid. So I mean, I think yeah, you definitely have to have pass catching if you want to have an RB and you want to be somebody that you're taking high, and you want to be someone that you're putting a lot of value on. I think you pretty much have to be a
Yeah.
pass catcher,
It-
but I don't know that necessarily that being a pass catcher is going to be enough to help them close the gaps on other positions like wide receiver or even tight end.
Yeah, and maybe not. So it's just the whole thing is fascinating. It's kind of like, like education wise. So before, back in the day, you can just get a high school degree and you could get a good paying job and and be fine for the rest of your life. Kind of lines up the same way with the running back position. Nowadays, you need a bachelor's degree and you might even need a master's degree to get that kind of same, let's say, production. So it's just the standard is rising and rising for running backs, and even then, it's still not easy. So it's a fascinating development in the NFL, and yeah, and it might just be the way the game's going to be.
Even your top end running backs, your elite best of the best running back in the NFL. I mean, they're making the same money that like wide receiver threes make these days, and that's sadly, I think it's just the way the game is going. With you've got rules heavily favoring offense, heavily favoring the passing game. The NFL wants more passing. The NFL is getting more passing. It's becoming by far a pass heavy league.
Yeah.
And even in addition to that, already you have pass heavy league devaluing running back, and then you just have so many schemes showing that running backs can be replaced. You have these Kyle Shanahan running schemes where he seems to be able to take any running back off the street and get him to rush for 150 yards against the Packers. You've got just all of these teams proving over and over again. It seems like every single time, running backs try to hold out, they try to do well for themselves, and the team comes along and say, okay, well, goodbye, we don't need you anymore, we'll replace you, and it really hasn't failed yet. And maybe eventually the day will come where, eventually there will be some sort of a point where the teams say, okay, well, RB's worth $5 million and the cap's $500 million. Yeah, we'll pay you that much.
Yeah.
Eventually it'll equalize, but I do think it's going to keep trending downward, at least downward relative to the cap.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's really a solution for that because, every once in a while you'll see people talking about, oh, well, they should try to change the CBA, try to change things for rookie running back contracts, try to find a way to get them more money. Well, the NFLPA doesn't just represent running backs; it represents everyone. And running backs are what they're going to be like 5% of the NFL. They're not going to. 95% of the NFL isn't going to give up concessions on their paychecks to help out the 5% that are running backs.
Right.
I don't see a change in NFL philosophy coming, barring, the NFL trying to do some sort of a rules change to encourage running more, which I don't see why they would, because
that's
at the end of the day, the NFL likes the passing game. The passing, and it sucks because you love to see a good running team.
Yeah.
I as I mentioned way at the beginning, I love seeing that hard-nosed football, just running, downhill running.
Mm-hmm.
But the NFL loves passing game, passing highlights. They've been encouraging passing. I don't see a switch away from that in the future for the NFL. So I just don't really see an easy path back for these running backs.
And it's a darn shame for those running backs. Well, kind of refocusing here to the NFC North. So we've mentioned, the Bears situation, and, those fans of my show are probably quite familiar with the Lions situation. But for the rest of the NFC North, so we mentioned the Vikings at the top of the show. Frauds this season, sure. We can, let's say, lukewarm agree on that. Maybe not as bad as people think, but definitely, let's say, down from the 13-4 record they had.
Yeah, I think that realistically, they're probably more around the level of a 10-win team.
Right.
Maybe they'll be fighting to get to that. They might be a little
Right.
bit better, might be a little bit worse, depending on how some things play out, how their draft picks develop,
Yeah.
how everything comes along. Uh, they've got some pieces. Justin Jefferson's probably the best wide receiver in the NFL.
You got the best.
They added was it Jordan Addison in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
They have Osborne's not terrible as a
KJ
3.
Osborne. Yeah, he won the game against us in week 3. Yeah.
As much as Kirk Cousins is a meme, he's not bad. He's probably a fringe top 10 quarterback.
Yeah.
They have Hawkinson as a good tight end. They've got
and they can keep him too.
They've got some solid offensive linemen. Madison's a good running back.
Yeah, I mean,
their defense needs some work. They lost some people defensively, but they've got a great offensive staff. They're very promising year out of their rookie head coach. There's reasons to be optimistic that they'll be good this year. I think that you see a lot of people counting them off that, they're not a threat.
Yeah.
They're absolutely a threat. Anyone that says that the Vikings are not a threat is fooling themselves.
Right.
This is a team that, again, they're not as good as their record, but they're also not a 3-13 team.
True.
The way that people talk about the Vikings, you'd think that they went like 6-11 last year. Not,
and they were just like granted their trip to the playoffs,
and they won and they magically got into the playoffs.
Now, I'll give you the magic thing though. So for those, I guess from your camp, you're saying like they're not like their offense and their head coach, like they're not as bad as they seem. But for me, if like the actual play doesn't scare me, the dark magic and just screwy stuff that happens, that scares me. Because like what other team this season is gonna get again like they did against what happened against the Bills, fumble on the goal line, end of the game, and you recover it.
Yeah,
that's never gonna happen.
No, they were definitely
just that magic.
The benefit of good fortune last year, and you have to expect that to regress. But I think that they're probably. I think that they fight for the division title. I think that they're a team. I think ultimately my expectation is it will come down to the Vikings and the Lions fighting for the division title. I think they'll both be around 10-win teams.
I see that.
I think they'll be fighting for the title there. I think the Bears depend heavily on how Justin Fields performs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he comes out firing on all cylinders and he starts throwing at a Jalen Hurts level, then maybe the Bears can become a 9 or 10 win team. The big problem with the Bears in that scenario is they have essentially nobody on pass rush. They've improved their defense tremendously by adding the middle linebackers. It'll help a lot getting Eddie Jackson back. Gibson had a fantastic year as a safety. They've got some pieces, but their defense is going to struggle because of the pass rush. Ultimately, I expect the Bears to probably be a 6, maybe a 7-win team this year.
Okay.
Without going through the schedule and looking at all of the matchups.
Yeah, we don't gotta go that specific.
But I expect the Bears to probably be a 6 or 7-win team. You're looking for just improvements overall, improvements in the offense and the defense. Next step from Justin Fields. Ultimately, I think their final record depends on how much he improves. If he doesn't really improve, then yeah, they could be looking at a top 3 pick again. If he but if he starts taking that next step, if the improvements in the offense help out, I would expect them to be about a 6 to 7-win team with maybe hope that they could get up higher if Justin Fields is the guy. As far as the Packers,
does Jordan Love scare you at all?
Not really, and I hate you almost say that with bated breath because the Packers you're so used to the Packers pulling some sort of
like that
bogosity out of
that dark
their
cheese
team
magic,
to
man.
Get them good quarterback play that you almost hate to say something and jinx yourself. But
right.
Jordan Love is not really a guy that scares me. He wasn't somebody that I liked coming out of the draft.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think it was a good pick then. I don't think it's a good pick now. They were a team that was very mediocre last year with Aaron Rodgers and
8-9 record. That's mediocre.
Even if Jordan Love is a guy that can be a quarterback in this league and a guy that can play quarterback in this league, I think it'd be incredibly optimistic to believe that the Packers are going to improve at the quarterback position.
Right.
And I don't really see big improvements anywhere else on their team. So I look at it and it's like, well, their their ceiling is that they repeat the same season they had last year,
Right.
where they're a mediocre team. Um, and I expect them to be worse than that. I think realistically they're fighting the Bears for last place in the division. They're probably I right now would put the Packers as probably the fourth team in the division.
Right,
Just
and
because
that seems to be the
I do
consensus.
not believe in Jordan Love. I don't believe in Jordan Love. Their wide receiver core is weak. I mean, Christian Watson showed some flashes, so he,
Right.
you know, given the benefit of the doubt, and we'll say that he can be a good receiver. Then that's really their only guy. I mean, Dubes had some moments, but they
Yeah.
don't really have a very good wide receiver core. They don't have anything at tight. I mean, they drafted a tight end, but
Yeah.
rookie tight ends are never going to contribute right away.
Well, let's hope so for Sam Laporta on the Lions.
I it's tough for rookie
I
tight
meant me
ends.
to
They
get into
never
a
really
point.
it, unless you're Kyle Pitts, it's hard to contribute right away. So you look at the Packers and they're a team that just I'm not particularly scared. I mean, again, you say it with bated breath because they've been
Yeah.
scary for so long.
Yeah.
But you take a look back and you look at it objectively, and I'm not particularly scared of the Packers as a team
Yeah.
next
Like
year.
like you take the colors out of it, and then they're just a
And
regular team.
they're
Then
a team that I think is they were mediocre last year. They downgraded at quarterback to a quarterback that I don't particularly believe in. They're probably not going to be that great. And then we come back to the Lions.
yeah,
And
yeah. I'm curious of your view of the Lions because
they're
they seem to have like from the
they're
media
a
they seem to have a
good
stronghold on the
team
division.
with upside that I think gets overrated.
Okay.
If it seems like sometimes you talk about you hear discourse about the Lions, and if you didn't know how they were last year, you think they lost. You think they won the Super Bowl with how people talk about them, as opposed to a team that they had a very good end of the season, but this is still a team that started 1-6,
1-6.
1-7.
Yeah.
It was a very rough start for the Lions. They've still got some very real issues right now. Your only real wide receiver threat is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Even when JMO comes back, there's no guarantee that he's going to be anything. It wasn't.
I'll give you
Granted,
that.
he's
I'll
coming
agree
bac
with
from
that.
injury, but he didn't
Well,
really
he used
do
to,
much
he used
of
to be coming back
anything.
from injury. Now he's coming back from.
I'm talking
yeah,
more about how he
but-
did last year. He didn't really do much of anything last year. And
Oh, I see.
granted, coming back from injury, you got to work him into the system. You're not expecting him to light the world on fire, but
Yeah.
he had. I'm trying to remember. I used to have him on my dynasty team, so I want to say he only had like 3 catches last year.
No, that's about accurate. He had a
Um,
long rush. And
He had the one. Yeah, he had, I think a good run. He had like a 41-yard catch for a TD, his first catch.
against the
You know,
Vikings
there's-
at Ford Field. Yep.
You hope from a Lions perspective that he comes back and he can be that guy, but I mean, realistically, the Lions have one good receiver right now, and granted, Amon-Ra's a good receiver,
Oh, yeah.
but if something happens to Amon-Ra, he gets injured at all, then the Lions go to having what is probably one of the worst receiving cores in the league.
That it does get pretty bad
They're
without
they're
Sam
one
Brown.
wide receiver core or wide receiver injury away from being one of the worst receiving cores in the league.
At least,
From
I mean,
Josh
like,
Reynolds being your wide receiver one.
and there were there
know.
were some games where I guess a lot of the season last year was St. Brown and Josh Reynolds.
Yeah.
Sometimes you had DJ Chark. Sometimes one time you had JMO. So it's
And I'll give
I'll-
him,
so that's a
Reynolds
valid
isn't
argument, I would
awful. He's
say.
a good 3, but I think he's really, it's optimistic to have him as a 2. And, Lord help you, it comes to him being the 1. I think that's a bad scenario. And, I know they drafted Sam Laporta, but rookie tight ends, tight end is it's not an easy position to predict. You can't really rely on a rookie tight end to be good. You can't expect him to come in and be Kyle Pitts.
Right.
Realistically, it's going to take him 2 years to really get into the swing of things.
Yeah.
And then, I think their strength, definitely they've got strength in the running game. They had David Montgomery's a good running back. He's definitely a good early down back, breaks a lot of tackles. He's not particularly fast. He's got his issues. He's not a perfect back, but he's a good running back. You can use him as a 3-down back. He's running behind a very good offensive line. And then Gibbs I disagree with the pick.
That big running back conversation we were having. So at the
you've
time,
already kind of
definitely
heard my position on running backs.
Yeah.
I do not really support a team taking a running back that high, especially when I think that there's potential for other holes in the team that you could fill
Yeah,
better.
defensive line was a big one
I
that
know that
Lions fans were
people
talking
love
about.
to throw around, oh, he's an offensive weapon, but you hear that about so many running backs these days.
It's like
Oh, he's an offensive weapon. This guy's worth it. And then how many of those guys really are? And I think it's hard to justify taking a running back that high. I mean, that being said, I'm sure he'll contribute. He should be a good player for them. I question taking a running back that high. We'll
Right.
see how it goes. And then you have Jared Goff, who
Now this I'm interested in your thoughts.
Last year I think is probably peak Goff.
Really?
I
it was. I mean, pretty good.
I don't think he's going to improve on that. If anything, I would expect him to regress a bit from what he did last year.
Okay.
I have never been a huge Goff fan. I don't hate Goff. I don't think he's terrible, but I think he's mediocre. I think that he is the. Are you familiar with the concept of the Dalton line? I don't know if you've ever heard of the Dalton line.
I haven't heard of it, but I think from the name of it,
Dalton
I can figure it out.
Is sort of, for those who are not affiliated with the Dalton line, it's basically like the cutoff point for what you would consider a franchise quarterback.
Yeah.
Or anybody above Andy, and this is granted not current Andy Dalton. This would be going back to his Bengals days.
Yes.
Anyone that's better than Andy Dalton is a franchise quarterback, and you would want to lock them up. Anyone that's worse than Andy Dalton is, he's not the guy.
I've never heard of that before.
I think that Jared Goff, in my opinion, is kind of the closest thing that we have probably to the Dalton line. It used to be.
Okay.
I used to have it as Derek Carr was the Dalton line, although Derek Carr has probably fallen below the Dalton line.
A little bit. I would agree with that.
He's a bit below the Dalton line at this point. So that's kind of where I have him. I think he had some good moments last year, but ultimately I think he's an average quarterback, and I think that the lack of weapons is probably going to be a hindrance. And I mean, we will see. I think he's an average quarterback. He's not a quarterback that, when I hear the name Jared Goff, he's not a quarterback that I'm afraid of. He's not someone that, that strikes fear into my heart. The thing that scares you when you're playing the Lions is, okay, how do we deal with that offensive line and that running game? Because it's such a good offensive line. How do we deal with that? How do we pressure the quarterback? How do we prevent them from running on us?
It's the main focus of the game plan.
That's what scares you about the Lions is their offensive line. Jared Goff is, okay, he's serviceable. He's a good quarterback. Had a very good year last year. He can make some throws, but he's not a guy that I think is particularly scary. I think that last year is probably, I think that that's peak Goff. I think that, I don't think that you can really expect any sort of, you'll see every once in a while people, oh, he'll improve from that. I don't think that he will. I think that is his ceiling. And if he repeats that year, that's fantastic for the Lions. If he repeats that year, that's probably good enough for them to be a good team.
I think so.
But I don't think that he really is. I don't see him exceeding that. And I would expect him to probably regress slightly. I'm not saying that he's going to be bad, but I think he'll probably be a little bit worse than he was last year.
Okay.
As defenses look at what the Lions did last year, try to account for that, try to account for the Lions, really not having a ton of other receiving threats other than St. Brown. I think that, but overall, I do think the Lions are going to be a good offensive team. It's hard to be a bad offensive team when you have an offensive line like that.
Yeah, it just kind of comes with it.
They have a fantastic rushing threat. They have a good wide receiver one, even if their other wide receivers aren't that great. And they have a solid quarterback. They have a reasonably good quarterback.
Okay.
So I look at the Lions and I think they will be a good offensive. I'd be surprised. I'd be very surprised if they were not a top 10 offense. I think that
I would too.
I think that they will be a very good offense next year.
Yeah.
I think the biggest area of concern probably comes out of the defense.
Naturally with how the season went,
is not a defense that scares you.
Even so,
they've made some improvements.
So that's even with those improvements, they still don't seem to scare.
They're not a defense that I say, oh well, I'm really worried about how our team is going to match up against the offense. It's more of, okay, we're playing the Lions. How do we shut down their offensive line, and how do we keep points pace wise, as opposed to, man, how do we get our offense unlocked so that we can, so that we can get around their defense. I don't expect their defense to be the historically awful unit that it's been for the past couple of years.
I hope not.
But
Please don't. Please don't do it
I
again.
think that it's probably still going to be, a below average for league average.
So the Lions might be a little bit
lower end of defense. I think that they're an offensively skewed team.
Okay,
I think that in my opinion, I talked about I didn't really love the Gibbs pick. I would have probably gone, looked at more like a cornerback with that first pick.
Right, because I remember that was it was a pretty deep class for cornerbacks. So I was surprised they didn't have one of those at least the extra pick to go towards it.
And I know that they got a linebacker, so they did help out. I think it was Jack Campbell. So that helps a little bit on the defense. Although, again, with middle linebackers, you can argue if is middle linebacker the right choice, but it does help out the defense. So you can't really complain too much about that.
Yeah, they did something.
It's a late first round pick. At that point, you take the best player that you can.
Right.
And if they believe that Jack Campbell's the best player, then you can. That at that point you have to trust that your GM can make the right call. And generally, Holmes has been a solid GM. You can't be too mad. You can't be mad at them taking somebody with a late first round pick. At that point, you're just getting the best value you can.
Exactly.
I do think that there's, arguments that they could do more on the defense. I think that, as I said, I think their defense is probably still a bit below average. I think that ultimately that's what's at risk of holding them back. I think the big kind of the worry for the Lions going into this season would be, which Lions team are they? Are they more the team that ended really strong, or are they kind of more a mix of that team and that team that started at 1-6 on a historically bad pace?
Yeah, you get the first 7 games, or you get the last 10?
Which team is closer to the true Lions? How much more can they keep? How much room do they have to improve? Because right now I look at the Lions and I see a team that is probably about a 10-win team.
Right, and they got the line at that 9.5 wins.
Yeah, I think that was my win prediction for the Lions was 10 wins.
Yeah,
which then comes down to it being a very close fight, I think, with the Vikings for the division. Because I think that the Vikings are probably about a 10-win team as well.
Right,
so it comes down
it'll be between the two of them.
Who wins or loses a game that they shouldn't have, and how do the interdivisional matchups play out?
Yeah, and if the Lions have another Carolina Panthers game,
how do tiebreakers come down? And I think it'll be a very interesting division to match. I think that they'll both be solid teams, and whichever one doesn't get it, given how weak the NFC is, I think that the team that doesn't get it is very likely a wild card team.
Right.
I mean, I was talking about this with my fantasy football league the other day, and we're going over the teams in the NFC, and he's like, oh, the Lions are a top 5 NFC team. And I'm like, oh, no, they're not. They're not that good. And then I look at the teams that are in the NFC, and
start counting it off.
Okay, it's harder to argue against that because the NFC is actually really bad.
I'll take it.
The NFC is actually terrible. There are, in my opinion, 2 teams in the NFC that I think are legitimately good.
Can I guess them?
Yes.
Eagles and Niners?
Yes. And then the Cowboys are okay, but the Cowboys have this weird thing where they seem to eternally be less than the sum of their parts. You look at the Cowboys and it's like, man, they've got a lot of players who are great individually. They've got Diggs is fantastic. They have Micah Parsons, who's one of the best defensive players in the league.
Oh, yeah.
They have CeeDee Lamb's a good wide receiver. They just added Brandon Cooks, who's good. They have Gallup's a good 3. They've got Pollard's a good running back. They have some good offensive linemen. They've got good players on defense. You look at this team and you're like, oh, they have the pieces to be a very good team. And then they go out there and they play football, and you're like, man,
they play football.
What is with these guys? They just can't put it all together. And I don't know if it's, at the end of the day, I don't know if it's probably a coaching and a management issue more than anything else.
I mean, if you got the colors and the painting sucks, it must be the painter.
Yeah, you look
or the tools,
and it's like, on one hand, okay, it's hard to kick your coach away because they're not necessarily bad.
Yeah.
But every single year that team underperforms. So it's hard for me to say that they're a legitimately good team in the NFC. And then you look beyond that, and it's like, who else is in the NFC that's good? And it's like, well, the Lions are solid. The Vikings should be solid. The Giants are okay. They made the playoffs last year. They've got, they had a very good season out of rookie head coach.
Yeah.
They've got they've got holes, they've got concerns, but maybe they've got upset. But I can't in good conscience call them a legitimately good team.
Yeah,
They're a
especially
team
if
that, like,
the division is pretty. I mean, like you got Eagles and Cowboys,
yeah,
and then Giants would naturally be placed
they're a
third.
team that realistically feels like a fringe wild card team that is probably higher in the NFC than they should be, just based off of the NFC being so weak right now.
Right, more on the NFC's merits than than their
Yeah,
own merits.
and then you have the Seabirds, who are, again, they're solid. Pete Carroll's a fantastic coach.
They just can't. They just can't be bad. They're not allowed
they're
to.
a weird team because
Yeah.
no, it feels like no other team could pull Geno Smith for a year and have him actually be good.
Oh my god! I feel like the Lions game. That's what did it when they scored 48 on us.
And
that's what started it for them.
That is a team that I'm definitely interested in seeing this upcoming year because, on one hand, it's not even on one hand. It just comes out. Can Geno Smith repeat what he did last year? Because you look at it, and it's like, well, he's been bad for so long that you look at his track record and you're like, okay, it has to have been a fluke.
Right.
But then it's like, well, maybe, but he was also, he was good last year. He was legitimately good quarterback. He was one of the best deep balls in the league.
He was Pro Bowl.
He was a fantastic quarterback. They improved his situation. They got him Jackson Smith and Jigba, who was, probably the best rookie in the draft, wide receiver wise. They added Charbonnet as the running back to help take more pressure off him, in addition to already having a great running back in Walker. They have a fantastic wide receiver room. They have a fantastic running back room. So you look at it, and they have a reasonably good offensive line. You look at it, and it's like, well, okay, on one hand, you expect him to regress just because it's Geno Smith. How can he be actually good? But on the other hand, it's like, well, he was actually good, and his situation improved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking up. I pulled up his stats just because I knew he was like top of the league in completion percentage, 69.8% completion,
which is fantastic.
2022 season. And then I looked at the season prior, 2021. I mean, definitely not as much volume of passes, but 68.4%. I mean, it's been the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean,
in Seattle,
I think that ultimately, he will have another solid season, and I do think that the Seabirds are probably going to be a good team. I don't think they're going to be a great team.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately, Geno Smith is probably going to end up being somewhere around that Dalton line.
Yeah.
But the way he played last year was definitely above the Dalton line. But if I had to rank him now, he'd probably be around that, that Dalton line, that 13th, 14th best quarterback, just because it's hard to rank him higher with his track record.
Yeah, but given his track record, I mean that's a good thing.
Realistically, if he keeps playing like he did last year, the Seabirds should be a good team. They've got good players on defense. They had Tariq Woolen was fantastic rookie quarterback. It gets overshadowed a little bit because Sauce Gardner was just historically good.
Yeah,
but they had a fantastic cornerback. They've got some good players on defense. Again, I don't know that they're a team that I would call a legitimately good team or like a legitimate Super Bowl contender or anything, but they're a legit playoff contender. They should be solid next year.
It's going to be a very tough game for the Lions home opener in week 2. That's they got Kansas City Thursday to open the season, and then they got week 2 at home against the Seahawks again. I'm
actually going to that game. I'm very
That
excited
is a freaking awesome game to go to.
Matchup. I look at that and I see two teams that, again, I think are very similar teams. They had the same record last year, and it came down to tiebreaker. I think they're at a similar level this year. Honestly, kind of even similar situations this year going into the year. I think that's going to be a fantastic game just because I think it's a really even matchup.
Yeah.
You have a lot of really fun players to watch on both sides.
For sure.
Look, I got lower bowl tickets. My fantasy football team, we try to go to a game every year. Last year, we went to the Commanders game.
Oh, yeah.
Which was definitely a fun game in its own right.
It was a good pick, especially out of that first 7 games.
Oh,
yeah. You picked the better one.
It was a good offensive game. It was their only win. But it was fun to see. Well, what is it? We have I'm going off on a sidebar here.
That's
we have a friend in our friend group who's a Packers fan, unfortunately. So he catches a lot of flack. We actually have representation from the entire NFC North, which is kind of cool. We have a Packers fan. I'm a Bears fan. Obviously, we have Lions fans. We have a Vikings fan as well. And he said that the Lions have never lost a game that he has attended, and they continued that streak with us going there. He He said that I think he said if the Lions ever have a home playoff game, he'll try to buy tickets to help you guys out.
I hope he does. I hope he does.
Maybe we can start a GoFundMe account to chip in to get Sean Lyons tickets because he's good luck for the team.
I'll throw some cash his way. But anyway.
But back to, I guess, I think that'll be a fantastic game between those two.
Yeah. So, Angelo, we've taken a wide range of topics about the NFL. It's the football therapy that I've needed, especially for not only me personally, but for the Joe Show here. But unfortunately, I am going to have to kind of cut the interview a little bit short here, even though this is one of my longer interviews. And the Roadcaster's low on space. That's the biggest thing here. Otherwise, I would keep going here. But it's been so great to finally be able to talk football and to talk to you about football, especially. So thank you so much for coming out to the GioMoShow.
Thank you for having me on the GioMoShow. It's been fantastic. I really enjoyed the opportunity to be out here to talk on the podcast, on the show. It's fantastic being out here. I love talking football. I mean, as you've seen.
Yeah, can you tell?
I can sit here and I can talk about the NFL for hours.
And there's a lot to go through. So.
Oh yeah.
So for those who want to catch the Joe Show live on WXOU, then Thursdays at 6 o'clock is what your calendar's got to be set to for the Joe Show on 88.3 FM. And if you didn't get the live show, then Spotify and YouTube will be your home with a 5-star review and a like and subscribe as well. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week on the Joe Show.